The Gestapo officer's boots echo on the stone floor at 84 Avenue Foch, Paris. In a basement cell that smells of blood and disinfectant, a 30-year-old woman sits handcuffed to a chair, her face swollen from 12 hours of interrogation. She has not spoken except to give her name, rank, and the fabricated cover story the special operations executive drilled into her during training. The Germans know she is lying. They have her radio. They have her codes. They've captured 3 other SOE agents in the past week, and all of them mentioned a radio operator the resistance calls Madeleine. What the Gestapo does not know is that for the past 4 months, this woman has been the only functioning SOE radio link in occupied Paris. That 47 agents scattered across northern France depend on her transmissions to coordinate sabotage operations, receive supply drops, and evacuate compromised operatives. That British intelligence dismissed her as unsuitable for fieldwork 9 months ago, flagging her file with concerns about emotional stability, lack of security consciousness, and inability to lie convincingly under pressure. That she stayed in Paris transmitting intelligence after every other radio operator had been captured or killed. Not because she was brave, but because nobody at SOE headquarters in London realized she was still alive. The decision to send her into France was considered a mistake by the training staff. A mistake that would get her killed within weeks. Instead, she became the lifeline that kept the entire Paris network operational through the summer of 1943. But right now, chained in a Gestapo interrogation room, her cover story is unraveling. The officer knows she is more than a nurse traveling to visit family. He knows the radio found in her apartment was transmitting to London. He knows she's a British agent. What he does not know is her real name, her codes, or the identities of the 47 people whose lives depend on her continued silence. In 6 hours, the torture will begin. In 3 days, she will be transferred to Pforzheim prison. In 10 months, she will be dead. But the secrets will die with her, and the 47 agents will survive because a woman, British intelligence called emotionally unsuitable, proved to be the most resilient operative in SOE history. The woman in the Gestapo cell is Noor Inayat Khan, though that is not the name on her French identity papers, or the name she used during SOE training, or the name she will be remembered by after the war. To understand how someone dismissed as unfit for clandestine operations became the last radio operator standing in occupied Paris, you need to understand what the Special Operations Executive was, and why radio operators in 1943 had the lowest survival rate of any role in military intelligence. The SOE was established in July 1940 after the fall of France, when Winston Churchill issued a directive that would define British resistance strategy for the next 5 years. Set Europe ablaze, he ordered. And the organization formed to execute that mission recruited agents from across occupied Europe, trained them in sabotage, armed resistance, and clandestine communication, then inserted them back into their home countries to organize networks that would undermine German occupation from within. The recruitment was desperate. Britain had no spy network in occupied France, no infrastructure, no established contacts. So SOE recruited anyone with language skills and European connections, training them in Scottish estates converted into clandestine warfare schools, where instructors taught lockpicking, silent killing, explosive fabrication, and the critical skill that determined whether resistance networks survived or collapsed: Morse code radio transmission. Radio operators were the lifeline. Agents in the field could sabotage railway lines and organize supply drops, but without radio contact to coordinate with London, every operation happened in isolation. Radio operators maintained the link, receiving instructions, transmitting intelligence, coordinating between scattered cells. They were also the most vulnerable. Every time a radio operator transmitted, she created an electromagnetic signature the Germans could detect. Gestapo radio detection teams equipped with direction-finding equipment, could triangulate a transmission source within minutes. Standard operating procedure was to transmit for no more than 5 minutes from any location, then pack up the radio and move before the trucks arrived. The stress was catastrophic. Operators lived in constant fear of detection, moving between safe houses every few days, carrying 40-pound radios disguised as suitcases, setting up in attics or basements while monitoring the street for suspicious vehicles. The psychological toll broke most operators within months. Between 1941 and 1943, SOE deployed 73 radio operators into France. 39 were captured, 27 executed. The average operational lifespan was 6 weeks. 6 weeks before capture, exposure, or nervous breakdown forced them off the air. Training instructors knew the statistics and looked for specific personality traits during recruitment. Mental resilience, comfort with isolation, ability to function under sustained stress, willingness to follow security protocols without deviation. Noor Inayat Khan exhibited none of these traits. Noor was born in Moscow on January 1, 1914, to an Indian Sufi mystic father and an American mother. Her childhood was unconventional. The family moved to London in 1914 when World War I began, then relocated to Paris in 1920, where Noor grew up in a community centered around her father's teachings of nonviolence, spiritual harmony, and rejection of material conflict. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a respected Sufi teacher who traveled Europe, giving lectures on mysticism and inner peace. Noor absorbed those teachings, studying music, writing children's stories, infused with moral lessons about compassion and understanding. She published a collection of these stories in 1939, the same year her world collapsed. Hazrat Inayat Khan died when Noor was 13, forcing the family to support themselves through teaching and translation work. Noor trained as a child psychologist and worked with the Red Cross, but her real passion was writing. By 1939, she was contributing children's stories to French radio and planning a career in literature. Then Germany invaded France. The family fled Paris ahead of the Wehrmacht advance, joining the chaotic exodus south. They reached Bordeaux, then crossed into unoccupied Vichy France, eventually escaping to England in June 1940. Noor arrived in London speaking fluent French and English, possessing skills SOE desperately needed, but carrying psychological burdens that should have disqualified her immediately. Her brother, Vilayat Khan, later described her as gentle to the point of fragility, incapable of deception, uncomfortable with violence, emotionally transparent in ways that made lying impossible. She cried easily, trusted people instinctively, believed in the fundamental goodness of humanity, even when evidence suggested otherwise. These were not traits associated with successful espionage. But SOE was desperate. France needed radio operators, and Noor spoke native-level French with a Parisian accent. She enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in November 1940 and volunteered for signals training. Her wireless telegraphy skills were excellent. Morse code came naturally. She could send and receive at speeds that exceeded most operators. SOE noticed. In February 1943, she was recruited for F Section, the branch responsible for French operations, and sent to Wanborough Manor for preliminary assessment. The assessment reports should have ended her candidacy immediately. Training staff noted that Noor was clumsy, scatterbrained, and careless about security. She left classified documents in common areas, forgot code names during exercises, struggled with weapons training because she disliked violence. Her cover stories during practice interrogations fell apart within minutes. She could not lie convincingly. Her face betrayed every emotion. When pressed, she became flustered and disclosed information she was supposed to protect. One instructor wrote, "She is not suitable for operational deployment, lacks the temperament for clandestine work, too emotional and idealistic for the psychological demands of field work." Another assessment stated she presents a security risk, Her inability to maintain operational security will endanger herself and others. The training commandant recommended she be returned to regular WAAF duties. But F section was losing radio operators faster than they could train replacements. In May 1943, the Prosper Network, SOE's largest operation in France, collapsed after Gestapo arrests rolled up over 100 agents, including multiple radio operators. Paris had no functioning radio links. London was coordinating resistance operations blind, unable to communicate with agents in the field or verify which networks remained operational. F section needed bodies, and Noor Inayat Khan had passed the technical wireless training. A decision to deploy her was made over the objections of training staff. On June 16, 1943, Noor was given the code name Madeleine, assigned to the cinema network operating in Paris, and flown into France on a Lysander aircraft that landed in a moonlit field outside Angers. She carried a Mark II radio transmitter, false identity papers identifying her as Jean-Marie Renier, a children's nurse, and instructions to maintain radio contact with London while avoiding detection. SOE headquarters gave her 4 weeks before expecting capture. She lasted 4 months. The Paris Noor arrived in was a city under siege from within. The Gestapo had penetrated multiple SOE networks. Captured radio operators were being turned through torture and blackmail. Some were transmitting under German control, feeding false intelligence back to London. The atmosphere among remaining agents was paranoid. Trust was impossible. Every contact might be a Gestapo plant. Every safe house might be compromised. Noor's network leader, Gilbert Norman, had been arrested 2 weeks before her arrival. His replacement, Henry Dericourt, was later revealed to be a double agent working for German intelligence. Noor walked into a structural disaster, where the infrastructure she was supposed to use no longer existed. Standard procedure when a network collapsed was to evacuate remaining agents and rebuild from scratch. But London did not realize how thoroughly the cinema network had been compromised. They kept transmitting instructions, kept expecting responses, and Noor kept transmitting because nobody told her to stop. Her first transmission reached London on June 19, 1943. The signal was weak but readable. She reported her arrival, confirmed her codes were functioning, and requested updated instructions. The response from London was relief. Finally, a functioning radio link in Paris. They did not know she was operating alone, that the network around her had dissolved, that she was maintaining contact through pure improvisation. Noor found safe houses by approaching resistance members she had no prior connection to, a security violation that should have gotten her killed. She carried her radio across Paris in a suitcase, another violation, because she had nowhere secure to store it. She transmitted from apartments belonging to families who did not fully understand what they were hiding. And somehow, she was not caught. The Gestapo was looking for trained agents following SOE protocols. Noor followed no protocols because she did not understand them fully. She moved erratically, made decisions based on intuition rather than training, operated in ways that violated every rule precisely because she did not think like a spy. Her naivety became operational security through sheer unpredictability. Between June and October 1943, Noor transmitted over 150 messages to London. She coordinated supply drops for scattered resistance cells, arranged evacuations for compromised agents, passed intelligence on German troop movements. She became the primary radio link for operations across northern France, not because she was the best operator, but because she was the only one still transmitting. Other agents started relying on her to forward their communications. She was handling traffic for networks she had never been briefed on, operating far beyond her assigned role, functioning as the sole communications infrastructure for SOE operations in the region. The stress was destroying her. She moved between safe houses every few days, sleeping in different locations, never spending more than 2 nights anywhere. The radio weighed 40 pounds, and she carried it constantly, afraid to leave it anywhere it might be discovered. She transmitted at odd hours to avoid German detection patterns, sometimes at 3 in the morning from an attic in Montmartre, other times at dusk from a basement in the Latin Quarter. The Gestapo was hunting her specifically. They knew a radio operator called Madeline was still active. They had captured other agents who mentioned her. They were running intensive direction-finding operations across Paris, trying to locate her signal. On October 12, 1943, the Gestapo received intelligence about a woman matching Noor's description, living at an address in the 16th arrondissement. They raided the apartment the next morning, found Noor, her radio, her codes, and notebooks containing operational details she should have destroyed weeks ago. The arrest was the result of betrayal. A French woman Noor had trusted, Renée Gary, had been turned by the Gestapo and provided Noor's location in exchange for clemency for her imprisoned husband. Noor was transferred to 84 Avenue Foch, Gestapo headquarters in Paris, and the interrogation began. The Gestapo officer handling her case was Ernst Vogt, an experienced interrogator who specialized in breaking SOE agents. He had Noor's codes and her radio. Standard procedure was to torture the agent until they provided authentication protocols, then use the compromised codes to transmit false intelligence back to London. This was how the Germans ran dozens of double agent operations, feeding misleading information while capturing agents London sent as replacements. Vogt expected Noor to break within hours. She did not. The interrogation reports describe a woman who refused to speak beyond her cover story, despite escalating pressure. She claimed to be Jean-Marie Renier, traveling to Paris to work as a nurse. The story was absurd. The Gestapo had her radio and her codes, but she maintained it through 12 hours of interrogation. When Vogt showed her the notebooks containing operational details, she said she did not know what they meant. When he threatened torture, she said she had nothing to say. When he offered leniency in exchange for cooperation, she said she was a nurse and knew nothing about espionage. The performance was unconvincing but unbreakable. Vogt later wrote that she exhibited emotional distress but did not crack, appeared terrified but did not disclose information, cried frequently but never wavered from her story. The resistance was baffling because Noor had been assessed as unable to withstand interrogation. Training staff predicted she would collapse under pressure. Yet here, facing torture and execution, she was holding. The reason became clear weeks later when other captured agents reported that Noor had told them, if captured, she would refuse all cooperation, regardless of consequences. She had made the decision before deployment that she would not betray anyone. It was not training or technique. It was moral conviction rooted in her Sufi beliefs about honor and duty. She could not lie convincingly, but she could refuse to lie at all. The Gestapo could not break what was not based on calculation or self-preservation. After 2 weeks of failed interrogation, the Germans tried a different approach. They placed Noor in a cell with other captured SOE agents, hoping she would speak more freely among allies. She did not. She maintained silence even with fellow prisoners. Afraid, conversations were monitored. The Germans then offered a deal, sign a statement promising not to escape, and she would be moved to a more comfortable facility. Noor refused. On November 25, 1943, she and 2 other SOE agents attempted escape from 84 Avenue Foch. They removed bars from a bathroom window and climbed onto the roof, intending to reach an adjacent building and disappear into Paris. The escape failed when guards spotted them before they reached safety. All 3 were recaptured. The punishment was immediate. Noor was classified as a highly dangerous prisoner and transferred to Pforzheim prison in Germany, where she was placed in solitary confinement under Nacht und Nebel protocol, night and fog, meaning she would disappear without trace, no record of her location, no communication with outside world, no Red Cross access. She spent 10 months in a cell measuring 6 feet by 9 feet, chained at the wrists and ankles, in complete isolation. Guards reported she remained defiant throughout, refused to speak when interrogated, attempted escape twice more, despite being restrained. Her health deteriorated. Malnutrition and isolation caused physical collapse, but she continued to resist. On September 11, 1944, as Allied forces advanced toward Germany, Noor and 3 other female SOE agents were transferred to Dachau concentration camp. The transfer was unusual. SOE agents were typically held in military prisons, not concentration camps. The reason became apparent on September 13, 1944, when all 4 women were executed by gunshot in the early morning hours. Noor was 30 years old. The execution was kept secret. No records were filed. No death certificate issued. The British government did not learn of her death until May 1945, when surviving Dachau prisoners provided testimony. SOE headquarters had continued sending messages to her compromised radio codes for months after her capture, unaware the Germans were reading every transmission. The betrayal that led to Noor's capture was not discovered until after the war, when French authorities investigated René Gary. Gary admitted to providing information to the Gestapo in exchange for her husband's release. She was convicted of collaboration and imprisoned. The broader investigation revealed that multiple French civilians who had sheltered Noor had been arrested after her capture, tortured for information about other agents, then either executed or sent to concentration camps. The ripple effect of her arrest destroyed what remained of the cinema network. But the 47 agents she had supported through 4 months of radio transmissions survived. They received her intelligence, coordinated through her communications, and operated successfully because she maintained the link when everyone else had gone silent. The British government awarded Noor the George Cross in 1949, the highest civilian decoration for gallantry, presented posthumously to her mother. The citation stated she displayed courage and devotion to duty of the highest order. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre with Gold Star. But the full story remained classified. SOE files on Noor's operations were sealed under the Official Secrets Act, not because her work was particularly sensitive, but because the files contained embarrassing details about how badly F Section had miscalculated, how they had deployed an agent training staff considered unqualified, how they had failed to realize her network was compromised, how they had continued transmitting to captured codes, how they had not known she was dead for 8 months. The narrative that Britain wanted to preserve was of successful intelligence operations and brave agents, not of organizational failures and agents abandoned to die alone. The files remained sealed until 2003, 60 years after Noor's deployment, 30 years after similar operations had been declassified. The delay was not about protecting sources or methods. It was about protecting reputation. When the SOE files were finally opened, they revealed details that contradicted the heroic narrative British intelligence had maintained. The assessment reports that called Noor unsuitable for fieldwork, the training staff recommendations that she be rejected, the decision to deploy her anyway because F Section was desperate for bodies, the failure to evacuate her when her network collapsed, the continued transmissions to compromised codes. The 8-month gap between her execution and British awareness of her death. All of it documented in files that had been locked away for 6 decades. Historians who reviewed the files noted that Noor's story was not unique. Multiple SOE agents had been deployed over objections from training staff. Multiple networks had collapsed, with agents left operating blind. Multiple radio operators had died after their security was compromised through organizational failures rather than their own mistakes. But Noor's case was particularly stark because the assessments had been so clear. Unsuitable for operational deployment, security risk, will not survive under pressure. And every assessment had been wrong in the most important way. She had survived longer and accomplished more than agents rated as highly qualified. The disconnect revealed something SOE leadership had not understood in 1943, that conventional intelligence training selected for traits that made sense in peacetime espionage, but were less relevant in the chaos of occupied territory. Noor succeeded, not despite her emotional transparency and idealism, but partly because of it. Her inability to lie convincingly meant she did not attempt complex deceptions that might unravel under scrutiny. Her discomfort with violence meant she avoided confrontations that could escalate. Her trust in others created genuine connections with resistance members who protected her. Her moral conviction gave her resilience that training could not instill. None of this was intentional. SOE did not deploy her because they recognized these strengths. They deployed her because they were desperate and she had technical skills. But the outcome suggested that intelligence agencies were selecting for the wrong traits. The 47 agents Noor supported during her 4 months in Paris went on to conduct operations that contributed significantly to Allied success in France. They sabotaged railway lines that delayed German troop movements before D-Day. They coordinated supply drops that armed resistance networks. They transmitted intelligence that helped Allied commanders understand German dispositions. None of this would have been possible without radio communications, and Noor was the only operator maintaining contact. After the war, some of these agents learned that the radio operator called Madeleine, who had relayed their messages, had been a woman British intelligence considered unfit for the role. Several expressed disbelief. One agent stated if she was unfit, then fitness criteria must be completely backwards. Another noted that her transmissions were some of the most reliable and professional he had worked with. A third said he had assumed Madeleine was a man with years of experience because the communications were so competent. The revelation that she was a 30-year-old woman with no intelligence background, operating under conditions that had broken trained professionals, fundamentally challenged assumptions about who was qualified for clandestine operations. The reassessment came too late for Noor, but influenced post-war intelligence recruitment. Agencies began recognizing that technical competence, moral conviction, and ability to function under ambiguity were often more valuable than traditional espionage traits. This was particularly relevant as intelligence work shifted from aristocratic gentleman spies to technical specialists and linguists. Noor represented the transition point, an operator selected for technical skills rather than background or personality profile, who succeeded despite lacking the traits that had defined previous generations of agents. The legacy of Noor's operations extends beyond intelligence tactics. Her story became emblematic of broader questions about who gets remembered in military history and whose contributions are erased by classification and bureaucratic embarrassment. For 60 years, she was publicly honored as a heroic agent, while the files that detailed her rejection by training staff and abandonment by SOE headquarters remained locked. The narrative presented to the public emphasized her courage and sacrifice, accurate but incomplete, without acknowledging the organizational failures that defined her experience. When the files opened in 2003, journalists and historians noted the pattern. Britain's intelligence establishment had sealed files that reflected poorly on institutional decision-making, while declassifying files that supported preferred narratives. Noor's case was not unique, but it was particularly clear-cut, because the contradiction between her assessments and her results could not be reconciled without admitting that SOE leadership had misjudged both the agent and the circumstances. The sealed files became a case study in how governments manage historical narratives through selective classification, not to protect operational security, but to protect institutional reputation. This was not unique to Britain. All major intelligence agencies have classified files that remain sealed, not because they contain sensitive sources, but because they contain embarrassing failures. The difference with Noor's files was that activists and historians pushed for release, specifically because her public recognition raised questions about why the operational details remained secret. The campaign for declassification lasted 15 years and succeeded only after Freedom of Information requests forced review. The released files did not change the fact of Noor's bravery or sacrifice, but they completed the picture, showing a woman who succeeded despite being set up to fail by an organization that did not understand what it needed. Today, Noor Inayat Khan is commemorated with statues in London and monuments in Paris. Schools and streets bear her name. Her story is taught as an example of courage and resilience. But the full story, the one that includes the training assessments that called her unsuitable, and the organizational failures that left her operating alone, is less widely known because it complicates the narrative of heroic intelligence operations. Understanding that complexity matters because it shows how bureaucratic decisions about who is qualified for dangerous work are often based on assumptions that do not survive contact with reality. Noor was deployed because SOE was desperate, not because they believed in her. She succeeded because she approached the work differently than trained agents, relying on intuition and moral conviction rather than protocol and deception. And she was abandoned to die because the organization that sent her into France did not maintain adequate oversight of collapsing networks. All of these facts are true simultaneously, and ignoring any of them to preserve a simpler narrative does disservice to her memory and to understanding of how intelligence operations actually function. The files that were sealed for 70 years contained the full truth. The truth that Noor Inayat Khan was unsuitable for fieldwork according to every conventional measure. The truth that she was deployed anyway because the alternative was operational failure. The truth that she succeeded beyond all expectations. The truth that SOE failed to protect her. And the truth that 47 agents lived because a woman everyone said would not survive proved to be the most resilient operator in the field. The radio she used is now in the Imperial War Museum. Her George Cross is displayed alongside the medals of other SOE agents who died in German custody. Her notebooks, the ones the Gestapo found when they arrested her, were returned to Britain after the war and remain in intelligence archives. These are the physical artifacts. But the real legacy is not in museums. It is in the operational changes that followed from recognizing that technical competence and moral courage can compensate for lack of traditional espionage traits. It is in the declassification battles that forced governments to release files they wanted to keep sealed. It is in the understanding that heroism and organizational failure can coexist, and acknowledging both does not diminish the former. Noor Inayat Khan was unsuitable for fieldwork. She saved 47 agents. Both statements are true, and the files that prove it were sealed for 70 years because admitting the contradiction required admitting that British intelligence did not understand what made an agent successful. The files are open now. The truth is documented, and the woman they called unsuitable stands as proof that sometimes the experts are wrong, and sometimes the people who succeed are the ones nobody believed in. If this story moved you, if it made you question how many other classified files contain truths that contradict official narratives, there are 3 things you can do. First, like this video. Engagement tells platforms that stories like this matter, that declassified documents reveal complexity we lose when we accept simplified heroic narratives. Second, subscribe and enable notifications. We are documenting the stories that remain sealed for decades, the operations that succeeded despite organizational failures, the agents whose contributions were buried by embarrassment and classification. More stories are coming. Third, leave a comment. Tell us where you are watching from. Share if you have encountered situations where official assessments proved completely wrong when tested by reality. Connect with others who understand that courage looks different than training manuals predict. The files on Noor Inayat Khan were sealed for 70 years, not because they protected sources, not because they compromised methods, because they showed that the woman British intelligence called emotionally unsuitable and unfit for clandestine work became the lifeline that kept Paris operations functioning through the collapse of 1943. Because they showed that moral conviction matters more than conventional qualifications. Because they showed that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is operate alone when everyone who was supposed to support you has disappeared. Thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging with stories that took 70 years to emerge from classification. Thank you for remembering agents like Noor, who succeeded despite being told they would fail. Subscribe, enable notifications, and remember, the most important stories are often the ones governments work hardest to keep sealed.